Scooby. Hi, I'm Scrappy-Doo.
Scrappy-Doo?
Let me at him! Let me at him! Let me at him! Let me at him!
Scooby, Scrappy-Dappy-Doo, Scooby,
Scrappy-Dappy-Doo!
Scooby, Scrappy-Dappy-Doo.
Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta! Puppy power!
Scrappy-Doo?
Uncle Scooby? Scrappy-Dappy-Doo!
Scooby-Dooby-Doo?
Hello again, my meddling Scooby Doo fans, and welcome to another review into the world of Scooby Doo. So after 40 successful episodes, the Scooby Doo show sadly concluded its run around Christmas time of 1978. And while the Scooby Doo show was a step up from the new Scooby Doo movies, ratings-wise, it was unfortunately still low in ratings and was not the success that Hanna-Barbera would have liked, despite I and many other fans loving the show and considering it one of the best of the franchise. Unfortunately, at the time, it was not viewed as such, and audiences seemed to be tired of the Scooby-Doo formula as they found it repetitive, and they wanted something new. So what did Hanna-Barbera decide to do for their for Scooby-Doo's fourth outing on the small screen? Well, they gave us the fourth show in the Scooby-Doo franchise, titled Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. So, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, for season 1 at least, keeps the tone of the Scooby-Doo show. The forefront is mystery with a little bit of horror and a comedy in the background, although with the addition of Scrappy, the comedy is upped a little bit. But seasons 2 to 4 are more comedic adventures with no mystery, no horror, and Fred, Daphne, Velma are out of the picture, and it's just Scooby-Doo, Shaggy, and Scrappy. So the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo essentially ran for 4 total seasons for a total of 49 episodes. Now, some sources like to claim that there are 2 different shows titled Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. However, I don't buy this, as despite the 2 unique formats to season 1 and seasons 2 to 4, the title card's the same, the intro's the same, and there's nothing really about it to make me suggest that it was a new show. And I feel like if it was a new show, they would have just titled it something different like they did in the next show called The New Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo Show. They didn't do that, so I'm inclined to believe that they're the same show, and I'm going to treat it as such. So maybe I'm incorrect, maybe you guys don't view it as such, but I personally don't buy it, and I think Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo is just one singular show that ran for 4 seasons and a total of 49 episodes. So yeah, Hanna-Barbera had 2 distinct formats, but there's one key difference that they decided to do. They took the idea that they had in the Scooby-Doo show, and that was the idea of additional characters. Now, you guys know from what, back in the Scooby-Doo show how I feel about additional characters, but I essentially said I don't like additional characters. I think it's unnecessary, I think it takes away from the gang's dynamic, and I personally don't need to see the, adding members to the gang or subtracting members to the gang. I just want the core 5 members of the gang solving mysteries. I don't need another character involved in the mix, as I think it disrupts the chemistry of the gang and, just the show as a whole, just the franchise as a whole, like their core chemistry and the core group. It, disrupts their dynamic. But Hanna-Barbera decided to take that idea and crank it up to 11 and decided to be like, okay, we toyed with this idea a little bit, but why don't we take this idea and basically implement a permanent member to the Scooby Gang? So rather than doing what they did with Scooby-Doo, where they just had an additional character come in every other episode, in this show, they had an additional character show up in every single episode, and he's basically the second title character besides Scooby in this show. That character is Scrappy-Doo. This is the first show with Scrappy-Doo in it, and Scrappy-Doo is a controversial character in the Scooby-Doo franchise. There are some people who love him, some people who hate him, and then there's that small portion that are right in the middle and could kind of like flip-flop with how they feel about him depending on certain media. So, Scrappy-Doo is essentially the headstrong, boisterous, brave nephew of Scooby-Doo. He sees Scooby as, like, a brave, heroic role model, and he views his uncle in this different light than he actually is, and he tries to emulate that. He tries to emulate what he thinks what he thinks Scooby-Doo actually is. He thinks Scooby-Doo is this brave person that goes headfirst into danger and solving mysteries, when in reality, Scooby-Doo's the coward, and the ones that want to go headfirst into solving mysteries is Fred, Daphne, and Velma. But Scrappy sees Scooby as a role model, so he takes that idea of what he thinks his uncle is and tries to emulate that. Now, I'm just going to come out and say what my opinion is on Scrappy-Doo, because I've already said I don't like additional characters. And while I did say that Scooby-Doo was, an alright character because he was in a couple episodes. I hate Scrappy-Doo. I don't like him as a character. I think he ruins the chemistry of the gang. I think he ruins the flow of the gang, their dynamic. I think he's an unnecessary addition. I don't like his era of Scooby-Doo. I find him very annoying. It's not just the writing. I don't find his character compelling at all. He doesn't, add any compelling. He's not a very compelling character to watch, and often detracts from the episodes that he's in. And I know he has his fans, and that's totally fine. I totally respect that. And if you are a Scrappy-Doo fan, you're still welcome to watch these reviews. And I'm going to try my best to be honest with these episodes and honest with my opinions and not dog on Scrappy despite me hating him, and give it a fair chance. And if Scrappy's good in an episode, I will acknowledge it. But I just want to make it clear that no matter what I think about when it comes to Scrappy in individual episodes, my core opinion has not changed. I do not like Scrappy-Doo and I hate him, no matter how I feel about him in an individual episode or film. It doesn't matter how he is in those individual episodes or film. My opinion will not change on him. I don't like him as a character, and I find him very annoying and very disruptive, and I find him an unnecessary addition to the gang, and I hate him. So if you're a Scrappy-Doo fan who doesn't really like hearing criticisms about Scrappy-Doo, then I would suggest maybe taking a step back from the channel and come back when we get to a pup named Scooby-Doo. If you're a Scrappy-Doo fan who's okay with hearing my criticism, then you're welcome to stay and continue with me on this journey. But if you're a Scrappy-Doo hater, oh boy, you're in for a ride, because this is your platform to hate on Scrappy as much as I do. But yeah, I don't like Scrappy. I never have, and I never will, and that's my opinion. And I respect people who like the guy. I respect people who are in the middle. But I am on the fence, on the side that says I hate Scrappy. I think he ruined the franchise, and I'm personally not a fan of his era of Scooby-Doo. So expect a lot of negativity going forward. No matter, I'll try to find some diamonds in the rough, some gems, but overall I expect this era to be awful and terrible. But that's my opinion on Scrappy. So let's go over, most of the main cast returns from the Scooby-Doo show for Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. You have Frank Welker back as Fred. You have Heather North back as Daphne. You have Pat Stevens back as Velma, although Pat Stevens is only in, I believe, the first 11 episodes, and then she unfortunately leaves. I'll get on to the reason why, when that episode comes and why she leaves. But yeah, unfortunately, she does leave at a certain point. And Marla Frumpkin takes over Velma's role after for the remaining episodes of the show, of season 1 anyways, before she's kicked out for seasons 2 to 4. Shaggy is once again voiced by Casey Kasem, and Scooby is once again voiced by Don Messick. And Lenny Weinrib voices Scrappy, at least for the first season. Seasons 2 to 4, Don Messick takes over the role of Scrappy. I'll also get into that when we finish up season 1 and get into season 2. But yes, most of the core cast returns. We have Frank, Heather, Pat, Casey, and Don all back. Unfortunately, Pat does leave midway towards the season, and Marla takes over towards the end, and she, comes back in subsequent shows. But this is Pat Stevens' final show as Velma, so this will definitely be, interesting to see how her tenure as Velma will end. But of course, that's not until, the 11th episode, so we'll get on to, that when the time comes. But that's essentially what Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo is. For the first season, It's essentially like the Scooby Doo show. It's a continuation of the Scooby Doo show, but with an additional character with Scrappy. And we still have 20-minute, the 20-minute format, the gang solving mysteries, with Scrappy added into the mix as a permanent member. And then seasons 2 to 4 has Fred, Daphne, Velma, out of the equation, and Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy go on these comedic adventures, and there's no mystery, and, there's no horror in any sort of way. So, yeah, there's 2 distinct formats that Hanna-Barbera decided to go for in this 4th outing. But essentially, I'm not a huge fan of the show, and while season 1, I'll be interested to see how the mysteries hold up, seasons 2 to 4, I am dreading, as I hate the comedic adventures. So those are going to be awful. Hopefully, any Scrappy haters will endure this journey with me, or Scrappy lovers, whichever side of the fence you're on. Hopefully, you guys can endure this awful journey with me in the Scrappy-Doo era, and let's truck through this, and let's hope for the best. Find some diamonds in the rough, but let's get out of this era so we can get to a pup named Scooby-Doo, because I will be so happy when I get to a pup named Scooby-Doo, because I hate this era of Scooby-Doo. But yeah, with all that out of the way, last time I continued my 2025 Halloween special with a review of Season 3, Episode 16 of the Scooby-Doo show. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. We talked about how it was disappointing and underwhelming finale. The villain was definitely wasted. Canada was pretty wasted, as a setting, and the motive was very repetitive of the Dr. Coffin episode. But, of course, today, I'll be covering Season 1, Episode 1 of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, titled The Scarab Lives, which was released on September 22nd, 1979. The short synopsis of the episode is, the titular character of Shaggy and Scooby's favorite comic book, the Blue Scarab, comes to life and haunts its creator, Jerry Sloan. So for this review series, I'll be watching Season 1, Episode 1 of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo on Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, the complete Season 1 DVD. So this DVD has every episode of Season 1 of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo with the 20-minute mysteries. It does not have seasons 2 to 4, unfortunately, so I will have to watch those on probably lower quality online when we get to those. But it has the complete first season of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, so if you are a fan of, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo and like the first season, it has the entire first season of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo on DVD. For any, fans of the show or people, diehard Scooby-Doo fans. It does not have any, special features, unfortunately. But it is a nice, DVD that will give you all 16 episodes of the first season if you're a fan of those 20-minute mysteries with Scrappy in them. Now, as far as this episode's reception is concerned, I believe fans like this episode. The Blue Scarab is a liked episode from what I remember. It's one of the few Scrappy-Doo episodes I think I've heard it talked about. It is based on a comic book. So I do believe it is liked by, fans in the Scooby-Doo community. It's not talked about a whole lot, but I believe people who are, fans of the Scrappy-Doo era do like this episode. So with all that being said, is this a good episode? Is this a good start to Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo? Is it a terrible start to the show? Or is it an average middle-of-the-road start to the 4th show in the Scooby-Doo franchise, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo? Well, let's find out, shall we? So let's take a look at the episode to see whether I think it is a good or bad episode of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. The episode begins with Jerry Sloan, a cartoonist being menaced by his own comic book creation, the Blue Scarab, a superhero, who is forcing Sloan to stop drawing comic books of the Scarab. The gang and their new friend, Scooby's nephew, who wants to fight monsters and ghosts, Scrappy-Doo, hear about the menace from a newspaper and the mulch shop from a newspaper. Daphne thinks it's a publicity stunt, but Scrappy believes it, and they decide to help since the Blue Scarab is Shaggy and Scooby's favorite comic book. After they interview Sloan, Scooby and Shaggy stay at the studio while Daphne, Velma, and Fred talk to Jerry Sloan's publisher, Mr. Hardy. Mr. Hardy tells the gang if Sloan doesn't keep writing comics, he'll be fired. Meanwhile, at their studio, the Blue Scarab returns, threatening Sloan to stop making the comics, and if he doesn't, he will turn to a life of crime. And then the Blue Scarab vanishes just as Fred and the girls arrive. Scrappy chases the Blue Scarab as he is leaving and tries to catch him, but when the dust clears, it's discovered that he accidentally caught Howard Gruger, who quits because of the Scarab business. Shaggy discovers that the Blue Scarab is doing the same thing that the character is doing in an unpublished comic book of Sloane's, turning to a life of crime, almost as if the real Scarab is acting out the unpublished comic. Sloane tells the gang that the only person who has read the unpublished comic is Mr. Hardy. The Blue Scarab begins a crime spree across town, robbing a jewelry store, then a bank, and then the local museum. The gang follow the Scarab to the museum, ordering Scrappy to stay behind for his safety. However, the Scarab pushes a gargoyle off the roof to crush Scrappy, and I was cheering for him at that point because I was like, fuck, yes, please get rid of him, please be done with him. Unfortunately, my prayers were not answered, but the Blue Scarab was immediately, the Blue Scarab immediately won me over to his side as soon as he pushed that gargoyle off and it was trying to kill Scrappy with it. I was like, yes, please succeed. Sadly, he does not succeed, and Scooby saves Scrappy just in the nick of time, and the gang spot the Scarab on the roof and begin to pursue him. Scooby tells Scrappy to stay behind, much to his dismay, but he comes up with an idea to trap the Scarab. So there's a bit of an editing error in this episode, and I don't know if this has to do with the DVD itself or if the episode was originally aired like this. But maybe you guys could tell me, anybody who was alive back in 1979 could tell me whether this was the case or not. But essentially, the scene, basically, like I said, is when Scooby tells Scrappy to stay behind for safety. The gang are going into the museum to go after the Scarab. Now, Scrappy comes up with the idea to come up with the trap. So immediately, once he says that he's coming up with an idea for their trap, it's about to fade to the scene of the gang on the rooftop. But then, after a few seconds into the fade, it immediately cuts to the gang running into the museum, and then the four of them go into the elevator, and then Scooby goes into another elevator that the Blue Scarab was coming down in, and it starts this whole gag with Scooby and the Blue Scarab, before the Blue Scarab escapes and Scooby is able to get up to the roof, and then it goes to the scene that it was originally fading to with the gang up on the roof. Now, it was so confusing when I first watched it, and I don't know what the hell happened, but whether this was an editing error based on the DVD or back when it originally aired, it was so distracting. I don't know who, was editing that day, but they did a terrible job because the gag scene really was unnecessary and honestly took away from the episode and felt like padding. They really should have just, faded into the next scene like they were originally going to with, the gang all on the rooftop, because it's very inconsistent and it doesn't line up well because there's this whole gag with Scooby and the Blue Scarab, and then they're wondering where the Blue Scarab is, but Scooby knows where the Blue Scarab is because they literally just encountered them, he literally just encountered him on the elevator, so he knows that he went down. And then the Blue Scarab's on top of another building, and it's like, it's so odd, and like it's edited very poorly, so like it's very confusing to the viewer what the fuck is going on. So yeah, I don't know who the editor is for this episode, but they did a pretty bad job. They really should have just stuck with the original fade. There was really no point to this gag sequence other than just padding time, and it was very unnecessary and very distracting. And it honestly, was very, inconsistent for me, the viewer, who couldn't figure out what the fuck was going on and why things weren't lining up properly in the scene. The Scarab escapes from the gang, leading them to split up. Shaggy and Scooby stumble into Scrappy's trap, which sends Scooby into the fountain. Scrappy leads the others to the fountain, thinking he's caught the Scarab, only to learn that he caught his Uncle Scooby by mistake. Back in Sloane's office, the gang tries to figure out where the Scarab could be heading next after hearing that Sloane has quit until the Scarab is captured. Velma deduces that the Scarab should be at the newspaper printing factory, and they follow him there to capture him. They find him in the machinery room, and Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy accidentally wind up on a conveyor belt, heading towards a machine with a sharp blade coming at them. Scooby manages to jump off the top and grabs Shaggy with his feet, who in turn grabs Scrappy with his feet, and then Scrappy leaps off and lands on the Scarab's shoulders and holds his hands over his eyes. Shaggy and Scooby land on a roll of unprinted paper and manage to steer it towards the Blue Scarab, which wraps the menace up and captures him. Back at the studio, the gang explained the clues to help them figure out what was going on. Because of the crimes, whoever was pretending to be the Scarab had to have read the unpublished comic. Their second clue is that whoever it was might be a good artist, and the Scarab was painted well on the wall. So the gang thinks it could have been Sloane's competitor, Floyd Hotchkiss, who's the best artist in town. But their last clue is that the Blue Scarab's disappearance in the hallway. And the only person in that hallway was Sloane's assistant, Howard Kruger. So when Sloan unmasks the scarab, surprise, surprise, it turns out to be Howard Kruger. He padded his suit and loaded it with gadgets like Sloan created in his comic. And the episode ends with Kruger saying that he was sick and tired of being Sloan's unknown assistant and dressed up like the Blue Scarab to destroy the scarab so he could create his own character.
You do, Scoop?
Yeah.
We sure do, Shaggy. Show 'em, Monk. We could do a comic about the Blue Scooby and his partner and nephew, Scrappy-Doo.
Well, it's an idea.
He's the superest uncle I know.
Scooby Doo.
I'm going to give Season 1, Episode 1 of Scooby Doo and Scrappy-Doo 3 stars out of 5. So yeah, this was an average episode. It was an average start to Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. It was basically right down the middle, not really leaning one way or the other. It wasn't, a really good or excellent episode, but it wasn't, terrible or below average either. It was just like right down the middle, average, okay, decent, nothing really special with this episode. So I really could start with, either the negatives or positives. It really doesn't matter because I don't really sway one way or the other with this first episode of Season 1 of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. But I'll start off with the negatives first before I get on to the positives of the episode and the stuff that I did like about the episode versus the stuff that I didn't like about the episode. So starting with the negatives, my first one is I think Fred, Daphne, and Velma were all weak in this episode. I didn't really get the sense that Fred was really much of a leader in this episode. He didn't really fulfill his basic role at all. He didn't really help piece together the clues to help solve the mystery, and he didn't really create a cool trap in this episode. Shaggy and Scooby were just the ones to capture the villain at the end. Daphne didn't really fulfill any sort of role in this episode. She didn't really help piece together the clues to help solve the mystery, or was much of a leader, or was cowardly or comedic, or found any vital clues in the episode. And Velma didn't really fulfill her basic role either of helping to piece together the clues to help solve the mystery, or, being a leader. So yeah, Fred, Daphne, and Velma, unfortunately, were very weak and underutilized in this episode, and just were very, not that strong in this episode for me personally. Then we have Scrappy. Scrappy was very annoying and distracting in this episode, which is no surprise to me because I expected him to be as such. But yeah, he wasn't helpful in any sort of way. He didn't really find any vital clues, didn't really create a cool trap, or, was a leader or help piece together the clues to help solve the mystery, or cowardly comedic. Didn't really do any sort of, role in this episode, to make him at least somewhat, valuable or vital to the episode. No, he was just annoying as shit, going after random people, tackling other people, capturing his Uncle Scooby by accident, with one of his, traps. And, basically just being a nuisance and, distracting from the plot of the episode. And always foiling, the gang at every turn. And yeah, he's just very annoying. And then he excuses his behavior by saying, "Oh, I'm just a puppy." So, you still have to learn that that's not right. You don't tackle random people. Yes, he did technically find Howard Kruger, who was actually the man behind the costume. But still, I don't give a shit. If he wasn't the man behind the costume or not, he still tackled an innocent man for no reason, with no evidence, and excused his behavior by saying he was a puppy. Yeah, well, puppies need to learn how to act properly. So yeah, Scrappy, you don't get a pass at all. And so yeah, he was a nuisance in this episode, just as I predicted him as such. Speaking of Howard Kruger, let's talk about him outside of costume. And to be quite honest, I found him very uninteresting outside of costume. He didn't really do a whole lot. He just kind of got tackled by Scrappy. Sloan kind of introduces him to the gang, and then he just quits saying he's done with the scarab business. And that's about it. He doesn't stand out anyway, doesn't give the backstory for the Blue Scarab, or do anything, or is, a very interesting character outside of costume. He just, he's basically a nothing burger. But to be fair, the other suspects don't, stand out that much either. In fact, Sloan does a lot of the heavy lifting, and he's the victim, and he's not even one of the suspects. So yeah, Howard Ruger, very uninteresting character outside of costume, didn't really do a whole lot. I found the clues of the episode to be weak as well. So the main clues of the episode are, of course, the unpublished Blue Scarab comic book and the Blue Scarab symbol painted on the wall of Jerry Sloan's office. So neither of these clues are really particularly strong. They don't really narrow down the list of suspects that much, and they don't point towards a motive at all. You know, all it really does is just help explain, it kind of just explains, how, like, the actions of the villain, basically, like, what he's doing. The comic book explains that he's mimicking the actions of that comic book, and the symbol just explains that he, like, is going to come back and, antagonize Sloan until he stops. So yeah, the clues aren't particularly strong. They don't even really do their basic function of proving that this, comic book character isn't real. So yeah, they're not particularly strong clues. They don't really serve any function, to be quite honest, and there's too few of them. They definitely needed more clues to either narrow down the list of suspects a bit better, or help point towards the main motive of the villain better. As it stands, the clues does neither, and at some point, and to be quite honest, it really doesn't even do its basic function of proving that the Blue Scarab isn't a real, comic book character come to life. Because there really is nothing there that suggests that. So yeah, the clues just didn't do it for me. They didn't really serve much of a function in this episode and were very, very weak. I found the atmosphere of the episode to be very non-existent. I felt no tension or suspense or creepiness or eeriness throughout this episode. I wasn't fearing for the gang's safety because the Blue Scarab was a comic book hero, that was basically a come to life and was, being a menace and a villain. But he wasn't threatening the gang's safety or even Jerry Sloan's. He just wanted Sloan to, he was just basically, trying to tarnish his own image until Sloan stopped making comic books about him. Which isn't really that, doesn't really add to the atmosphere, to be quite honest. And I wasn't on the edge of my seat wondering what was going to happen next. And I didn't find anything creepy or eerie about the villain or the setting. I didn't find anything about the Blue Scarab to be very creepy or eerie. And I didn't find anything about the setting to be very creepy or eerie. So yeah, there was really no atmosphere for me in this episode. I just didn't sense any sort of atmosphere in this episode. It was non-existent. I didn't feel any sort of tension or suspense or creepiness or eeriness from either the villain or the setting. And my final negative is I found the setting of the episode to be weak as well. So the main setting of the episode is, of course, Lake City. We explored different aspects of Lake City, but overall, Lake City's the main setting of the episode. And it's very bland and generic. We've had a city before, but it's not a very memorable or recognizable city that the gang are visiting. It's just this bland and generic city. And the gang don't visit any cool places or have any interesting settings to explore. They're all just kind of basic, nothing settings and not very interesting in the slightest. So yeah, for me personally, I just don't find Lake City a very compelling setting. Despite the many different areas we go towards in this episode, it just felt like any bland, generic city setting that we've had, in Scooby Doo. And, didn't really stand out that much. It wasn't like a big city like New York City or something like that. It's just this bland, city just called Lake City. And it just has these bland areas that the gang visits that just are very generic and don't really stand out that much. It's just a very generic setting to me. So yeah, I didn't really find the setting to be very interesting, and I wasn't really that enthralled with the setting of the episode. But that's all I got for negatives. So I think it's about time to get on to the positives of the episode and what I actually did like about the episode. So starting with the positives, my first one is I think Shaggy and Scooby were good in this episode. They were their usual cowardly selves. I did enjoy them in this episode. They weren't very comedic in this episode. They weren't that funny in this episode. But they were cowardly, and they did help capture the villain at the end, which was awesome. And one thing I really liked in this episode, that, you know, with Shaggy and Scooby, is that I also liked that they were into comic books as well, and they saw the Blue Scarab as their hero. I like that Shaggy and Scooby, you know, were, you know, basically loved comic books, loved the Blue Scarab, were very attached to the hero, and while they didn't want to solve the mystery, they did feel, feel a little bit more involved because this was their hero. So I did like that, and I also like it because I'm a fan of comic books myself and superheroes myself. So I love that Shaggy and Scooby are also into comic books, and this is something I think later iterations of Scooby-Doo also follow through on, where Shaggy and Scooby are very into comic books. So I really like when they do that, and I like that they have, you know, they look up to the Blue Scarab, and, you know, kind of have a bit of a personal attachment to the villain because that's their hero. That's their comic book hero that they loved and have read comic books about and mean a lot to them. And to see him as a villain, you know, kind of, saddens them a little bit. So I really like that. I really like that, you know, it's a bit of a personal mystery for Shaggy and Scooby, mainly because, you know, they're big comic book fans and love the Blue Scarab as a character. So yeah, I love that we get to see this side of them of being very into comic books and being big fans of the Blue Scarab. I like that they helped capture the Blue Scarab at the end. And I also like that they just started their usual cowardly selves. I would have liked some comedy from them. They weren't as humorous as I would have liked, but they were certainly very helpful, and I did think they were very good in this episode. Next up, we have the villain of the episode, who I thought was good as well. So the main villain of the episode is, of course, the Blue Scarab. The Blue Scarab is not a very scary villain in this episode. He isn't, you know, scary in the slightest, to be quite honest. But to be fair, he is a comic book, you know, character. You know, he's not a comic book villain. He's a comic book hero, so I'm not expecting him to be scary. But he's very entertaining. You know, I don't know what it is, but he has this gravitas towards him, this presence. And his laugh is quite, entertaining. And also, I really loved when he pushed that gargoyle to try and kill Scrappy. I can't deny it. I loved it. You know, I was so happy when he did that. I was like, yes, please get rid of this fucking nuisance. Of course he didn't. But yeah, he definitely won me over to his side by then. But I still liked him before that point. You know, I found him to have a lot of, you know, gravitas and presence toward it. You know, he always had these grandiose entrances. And, you know, he had a very, you know, entertaining laugh and presence. You know, I just had a good time with him. Every time he showed up, I was very entertained by him. And, you know, I didn't find him dull at all. He was a very entertaining character. And yeah, you know, while he wasn't scary, I guess I shouldn't have expected as such, because he is a comic book superhero come to life. So I shouldn't expect a comic book superhero come to life to be scary. But he is entertaining. So that's all that matters. He was fun to watch, and he wasn't at least boring. I thought there were a good number of suspects in the episode. So you had 3 suspects in the episode. You had Mr. Hardy, you had Floyd Hotchkiss, and you had Howard Kruger. So they all were equally suspicious in the episode. There was 3 suspects, 1 villain, so a good pool of suspects to choose from. Mr. Hardy had the unpublished comic book. Floyd Hotchkiss was, you know, Jerry Sloan's rival. And Howard Kruger was his assistant and was the one that came in after the Blue Scarab had disappeared and ran off. And Scrappy was chasing after him, and he ended up tackling Howard instead, not realizing that he was actually the Blue Scarab behind the mask. But yeah, a good pool of suspects, you know, all equally suspicious, have their, own reasons for why they could be the Blue Scarab. And yeah, you know, there was 1 villain, 3 suspects, so a good pool there to choose from for the audience. I found the motive of the episode to be great as well. So the main motive for Howard Kruger was that essentially he wanted to scare Sloan into canceling his popular Blue Scarab comic book franchise so that he could create his own comic book character. This is a really awesome motive and a very unique and fresh motive, because this isn't a money or land motive. This is just a pure jealousy motive. He was Sloan's assistant. He didn't like that he was behind the scenes and wasn't getting the attention. And he wanted to be rid of, rid of this, Blue Scarab, character. He wanted to go off on his own and, make a name for himself and get the recognition he deserves. So I love that this motive wasn't, a money motive or a land motive. It was just a pure jealousy motive. He just hated that, Sloane, created this popular comic book character and was very successful with it, and he got no credit for it, and basically was, a, ungrateful assistant who just, didn't like being, hated being in Sloane's shadow and wanted to get his own recognition, but also knew that he couldn't do that, while still, being his assistant. So he tried to get rid of the Scarab character. Also, because if he gets rid of it, he doesn't have, any competition that he has to go up against. So yeah, I really like this motive because it's something fresh and unique we hadn't seen before. I like that this is like, an assistant for, a popular cartoonist who's made this successful comic book character. And he's getting all this recognition, probably is getting a lot of money from this franchise of Blue Scarab comic books. And he's probably very jealous of Sloane because he's gotten no recognition, probably has barely gotten any pay, or at least the pay he wanted. And so he wants to go out and make a name for himself and create his own comic book character, while also simultaneously getting rid of his competition, but also just trying to get, find a reason to get out of there. So I really like the motive. I think it's, it's a great, fresh, and unique motive. We hadn't seen this type of motive before. So I really think the Hanna-Barbera created a nice, unique, out of the box, fresh motive for this episode. So I really enjoyed the motive, really like it. I don't think we've had a jealousy motive before, so this was really cool. We haven't had any sort of motive like this in the franchise up to this point, so I really like this kind of motive. And if they execute it well, I imagine they'll use it plenty of more times, but this time it was done very well, and yeah, it just had great layers to it. I really liked it. And my final positive is I found the mystery of the episode to be good as well. So the main mystery of the episode, for me at least, was that you wanted to know, how did the Blue Scarab come to life from the comic books? How did he come to life? Was there some sort of black magic? Was it somebody else's doing? How did this comic book character that Jerry Sloane created somehow come out of the comic book pages and come to life? And why did he want his creator to stop making comic books about him? Why would the Blue Scarab want, Jerry Sloane to stop making comic books about him? Surely he would like the recognition. And how does the Blue Scarab, how is he able to differentiate between his own world and this world? How does why wouldn't he just confuse the real world with his own comic book world? So there's a lot of interesting questions and mystery about that. Like, how is he even aware of this not being his world, but the real world? And how does he know that, Jerry Sloane is his creator? And why does he not want, his comic books to continue? Why does he not want the recognition? And how did he come to life? Was it some sort of black magic? Was it some other means? Is it paranormal? Extraterrestrial? Is it something else? Like, what exactly is it? How would Sloane's comic book character come to life? And why would he want his creator to stop making comic books about him? And how can he differentiate between his own world and the real world of where Jerry Sloane, his comic book creator, lives? So yeah, a lot of good, compelling, questions that I'm asking throughout. Good, compelling mystery, and I feel like the answers we get are very satisfying. Overall, guys, I would personally not recommend this episode to fans and newcomers of the show. It's just a decent, middle-of-the-road episode. It's average, it's fine, but it doesn't really sway one way or the other, and it's not a strong enough episode for me to, recommend it to you guys. I just think there's better episodes that you could spend your time on, and I just don't think it's the strongest of starts to Scooby Doo and Scrappy-Doo. So yeah, if you're looking for an episode in this era, unfortunately this episode is not going to be that one for you. It has some good aspects to it, but it also has some bad, and overall it's just a very middle of the road, like, fine, meh average episode, and it doesn't really stand out or sway one way or the other. It's fine. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Please give a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the episode. Do you like this episode? Do you disagree with me? Do you think this is a better episode than I make it out to be, or then there's more positives that you see that I don't see? Do you disagree with me? Do you think this is a terrible episode? You know, do you think it has more flaws and negatives than I make it out to be? Or are you somewhere in the middle like me, where you think it's average, it's okay, it's decent, but it's not good or bad? I'm curious for your thoughts, so let me know. And subscribe for more Scooby-Doo content like this, or if you're just interested in any of my other content. Obviously, I have more Scooby-Doo reviews on the way. This is a Scooby-focused channel, so we cover all things ranging from the TV shows, the films, the video games, and the books. So if you're a diehard Scooby-Doo fan, a casual Scooby-Doo fan, you know, whatever side of the fence you're on, if you're, you know, a Scooby-Doo fan who wants to get in on the discussion and talk all things Scooby-Doo, and, you know, give your own thoughts on individual episodes, movies, video games, and books, then come join the channel and experience some amazing Scooby-Doo content. In my next video, I'll continue my 2025 Halloween special with the review of Season 1, Episode 2, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, titled The Night Ghoul of Wonderworld. This is actually an episode that is very highly regarded. It's considered one of the best of the Scrappy-Doo era. So it's very highly regarded by the Scooby-Doo community and fans. So I'm not sure what to expect, but I assume this is going to be a strong episode. Since a lot of fans in the Scooby-Doo community praise this highly, I'm expecting at least a good episode. Although since it's Scrappy, I'm not, you know, putting my hopes up too high because I don't know what it'll be like. Because he's very annoying. It can be very, and you know, can be very distracting, as like in this episode. But yeah, I am very intrigued to see if this episode lives up to the standards that the Scooby-Doo community has hold for it. And yeah, so if you want to know my thoughts on Season 1, Episode 2 of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, The Night Ghoul of Wonderworld, then come join me next time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and as always, peace out.
Uncle Scooby? Hi, I'm Scrappy-Doo.
Scrappy-Doo?
Let me at him! Let me at him! Let me at him! Let me at him!
Scooby, Scrappy-Dappy-Doo, Scooby,
Scrappy-Dappy-Doo!
Scooby, Scrappy-Dappy-Doo.
Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta! Puppy power!
Scrappy-Doo?